Hey guys, this is Aaron with Ross Training Academy, and today we're just going to be talking about the first time I've ever done CPR. So the first time I ever had to do CPR and chest compressions, I was just finishing up EMT school. I was in the last little bit of EMT school and we were doing our ride-outs, and so I got put on with an engine company. That engine company also had a probie. He had just finished EMT school and was nationally certified. He had a state certification, as well as his fire certs, and so he was a commissioned firefighter at this time. And so he was a probationary firefighter with the fire department. And so he was a few steps ahead of me at that point, but he had only been on for about a month or so at this point, and I don't believe he has ever ran a cardiac arrest either. I think that was his first one as well. So the day started off, I was real nervous showing up for my ride out. I showed up, checked off the trucks with the guys. They showed me all their medical equipment because it was an ALS engine, so they had all the ALS medications. They had their own cardiac monitor. They were basically an ambulance without the transport. That's what this engine company was. That's how all the engine companies were. At least at this fire department, that's how all the engine companies were. And so I got put there. The day started off pretty slow, comparatively speaking, for that station. We didn't really do a whole lot, not that I remember. I think there was a few calls earlier in the day. There was one call I remember. It was a woman who had a catheter blockage, and so it was causing a lot of pain, a lot of buildup in her bladder. And so she had called 911 just because she was having bladder pain. And one of the medics on the ambulance, they were able to kind of troubleshoot things, and they ended up finding that there was a clamp on the catheter tubing right as it exited, and it was pretty close to where the urethra was. And so they were able to find that. They unclamped it, and immediately urine started draining out into the catheter bag. The patient started feeling better, but we still transported just for further evaluation. I stayed with the engine company, so I didn't ride in with that ambulance, and so I didn't finish off that transport, but I was on that call. And that was probably the most exciting call of the day. We had a few other ones, it was a really busy station. Didn't really do a whole lot, nothing that really stands out to me. And then it started coming close to the end of the day. I was doing either an 8 or a 12-hour ride out, I can't really remember. But it wasn't a full day, I wasn't staying the night. And so the night was coming to an end for me. It was probably about 6-ish p.m. at this point. And a call came in for a cardiac arrest. Now the cardiac arrest was probably about 20 minutes from our station, but there was no other units available. And so we had to take that call, and that's what we did. We got in the engine and we started going down the highway. That was the first time where I thought, I don't really know what to expect. Everything else, I kind of had an idea of what to expect, and I was anticipating, but something like this is not something I thought I was going to be getting as a student. For whatever reason, I was kind of under the impression that dispatch knew that there was going to be a student there, and so they were going to kind of hold off the calls for that engine. That's not really how that works, but, that's what I thought going into this. So as we start getting closer, the captain, he's calling for, if anybody else is available. He's asking dispatch if anybody's closer, if we can swap calls with anybody who might be closer. But there was another unit in the area, or relatively close, probably about the same distance, maybe a couple minutes closer than we were. And so they tried to swap calls, but we were both responding to very critical calls in different areas. And so dispatch kind of just said, no, go to your respective calls. And so that's what we did. We show up and we arrive into this neighborhood, and this neighborhood is a pretty new, recently built, new development area. And, I get out the engine, I grab the orange kit, and the orange kit, it was a orange Pelican case, and it had our medications in it. It was the ALS medications, really just all the medications were in that one. Other guys grabbed the monitor, somebody else grabbed the airway box. It was a black Pelican case, the airway bag. I had my gloves on at this point, I had my goggles on. Um, I'm pretty sure I was the only one with the goggles on, but hey, I was just doing what I thought was right. Which is right. You should definitely have, your gloves and goggles on getting out the truck, especially for a call like this. So we go ahead and we start walking inside. And I don't really have any dispatch information. When I was doing my ride-outs, even for my paramedic ride-outs, they basically just wouldn't tell me what the dispatch information was. They would sometimes tell me the nature of the call, and so like this time cardiac arrest, and then they just kind of wanted you to figure things out as you got on scene. Once you're on scene, figure it out, put the puzzle together. And I think that helped me a lot with learning and becoming a better EMT and a better paramedic, just by kind of going into the unknown and learning how to make something happen. So we start walking into this house. We all kind of file in together, and I remember this house was still being kind of built up. The basement was still being built up, and so we're walking in, and there's a woman. She's standing out on the porch because the upstairs is finished, and this person, her family, I don't really know how many people were there, were living in there, but they were just getting the basement finished. And so she's standing on the porch and she's crying, just kind of like sat over the railing, bent over the railing. And I just kind of glance at her and then I look away. I walk into the house. I follow one of the construction workers downstairs, and it was one of the other construction workers. They had a cardiac arrest. Not too sure why they had a cardiac arrest. Maybe it was a heart attack that led to the cardiac arrest. Don't really know the true cause of why it happened. But we walk downstairs. I'm the first one in the file. I'm holding the orange kit. And we go down the stairs, and I just kind of stop. I get to the bottom, move to the side, and I just stop. And I'm staring down at this person who's getting CPR performed on them by one of the other construction workers. And I freeze. I just kind of stand there. And I'm not too sure how long I was standing there. It was probably only about 5-10 seconds or so, because I remember one of the other guys from behind, I think it was the probie, he went around and he stopped the person doing CPR, felt for a pulse, no pulse. He started doing his own CPR. And so bystander CPR was done. The medic, he went down and started doing his thing, getting the monitor on, kind of running the show. And then one of the guys, he was the paramedic on the engine. And so he was not only training me, but he was also training the probie. And he walked up behind me, kind of tapped me on the back, and he was like, all right, go get him. And so I walk over, I get knelt down on the other side of the patient. And after that 2-minute cycle, I switch out with the probie and I start doing chest compressions. And I just start doing the chest compressions and just the best that I could. The guy, he was telling me, the trainer, he was telling me, or a preceptor, I think he told me to slow down. I was probably going a little too fast, so he said slow down a little bit. But I started getting into a rhythm and I was doing my CPR, my chest compressions for the first time. Still kind of felt the crunching and the grinding motion within the chest wall, which was a very odd feeling. I did my 2-minute cycle. The probie did another 2-minute cycle. I did another 2-minute cycle, and then I was called off by the preceptor. He had called me off, and at this point, an IO was established. I think they had either an ET tube or an eye gel, something in the patient's airway, and I remember just kind of stepping back and watching somebody else perform the chest compressions, and you just see blood going into the tube. And every time you do the chest compressions, you see that blood going into the tube. I wish I would have known then that that was normal. And I asked after the call, like, hey, why did that happen? And yeah, no, that's a normal thing to happen. And that's something I try to tell people when I teach my CPR classes. I just try to let them know some of these real things that can happen and are okay to happen. And then how to deal with those things, how to treat those things when they do start happening. That's something that wasn't taught in my CPR course, and so I'm glad I am able to now teach that to others so that they know what to expect. So yeah, I get called off, and then I'm holding the saline bag. That was my job for the rest of the time we were on scene. I'm holding this saline bag. They have the pressure bag over top of it so that it pushes through the IO. And so I'm just sitting there holding it. And I don't know how much time has went on by this point, but I start to notice that there is a smell of pee, a smell of urine. And so I kind of got a little concerned. I kind of thought maybe I was in shock. And so, like, I was questioning myself. I was like, did I pee myself? And there was no real way for me to check because I had my gloves on, but I was holding the bag and I was trying to do pretty discreetly because everybody's there, police officers, the fire truck, the ambulance, we're all there. And so I'm holding this bag and I take the backside of my gloved hand, and I start kind of brushing, my inner thighs area just to kind of feel if it was wet. Because I didn't know. I was like, maybe that was me. Because it was a really strong smell. And then I kind of figured out, like, no, I don't think that's me. And so I, started looking around trying to figure out what is this smell coming from. And it was coming from the patient, unfortunately. The patient did urinate on themselves. Once I saw it, it was pretty obvious that, yes, they did urinate on themselves. But again, that's something I guess I should have known, but it wasn't something that was talked about in my, CPR class, my EMT class even. They didn't really cover that type of stuff, the realities of CPR. And that's another thing that I try to teach when I'm teaching my classes, because that is a common thing to happen, people to pee on themselves, poop on themselves. That's an okay thing to happen. So after that, the medics, they're doing their thing. They're seeing whatever they see on the monitor. At that time, I didn't know what they were looking at, what they were looking for. I was oblivious to it. I was just do what I'm told and I'll do my best. So after some time, they decided transport. We're going to transport now. And so we get the guy, the construction worker, onto a mega mover just because it was the easiest way to get them moved. And then we had somebody go and put a backboard on the stretcher, or it was already there. I'm not too sure. I was on the engine, so I don't know what the stretcher side and the ambulance side did before walking in. But we used a mega mover, carried the person out. We piled all the equipment on top of them, which again, that's a normal thing to do. We need to move all the equipment. We need to leave it all attached. And so you just kind of set it on the patient and then reorganize it once you get in the box in the ambulance. So the IV bag, laid across them, the monitor, the oxygen tank, and we carry them out. Get them hooked up, or get them secured to the stretcher, to the backboard. They're continuing to do CPR. This was years ago, and I'm not sure what the rationale was for the transport, but that's what happened for this call. And so they wheel him into the ambulance, and I ask, it was either the captain or the preceptor. I was like, do I go with? And he had told me no. I think it was the captain. I think the preceptor and the probie went. And I think the ambulance, or I know the ambulance had a student with themselves. And so that was, 4 or 5 people in the back of the ambulance. And so they didn't want to add an extra person. And so the ambulance went, I got back in the engine, and we drove to the hospital to pick up our guys, to pick up the rest of our crew after the call. And so by the time we got there, they're already out cleaning the ambulance. And I'm not too sure how the story ends, I'll be honest with you. The person that they were doing CPR on and transported, I'm not too sure whatever happened with that. I think they might have gotten Ross back, and then whatever happened on the hospital end is just kind of what happened on the hospital end. Again, as a student, and I was still, I guess, nervous, shy at this time. I didn't really ask a whole lot of questions like what happened, what are they going to do. Never really got a follow up with that one, unfortunately. And so that's it. That's how the story ends. That was my first time ever doing CPR, seeing somebody in cardiac arrest, and that's how I reacted. I initially froze. I didn't know about blood coming out the mouth and vomit. I didn't know about, the urination, and so I was checking myself, and I was confused about the blood coming out, and so that's when I was asking, when everybody was cleaning up the ambulance, that's when I was asking about that, what was happening. But yeah, it turns out these are normal things to happen. And so even if you freeze up on a call, even initially, that's okay. That's a normal thing to happen. Everybody has a time where they aren't that good. You get better with experience, and hopefully you have guys with you, girls with you, just other providers that are able to help guide you and make you better. Getting training is going to make you better. Just practicing scenarios so that when you really run into these things, you know what to do. And so, yeah, that's basically just how that went. It was a very unfortunate thing. I do think I learned a lot from that experience, and every experience after that just got easier. And that's just kind of how the profession goes. And so it is unfortunate that that person did lose their life. That's the worst thing that could have happened to anybody. And that should be a highly respected time. It shouldn't really be, you shouldn't be laughing on scene during those times. It needs to be a very respected, event. So every call that I'm on, I try to use that as a learning experience. Everything that I learn, I try to share with others, just so that if they were ever in these scenarios, they know what to expect. They kind of have a better understanding of these events, and I think that'll just help the most amount of people. I don't think this is common things to be talked about in your schools during your CPR classes, and these are real things. I think it needs to be respected, but it also needs to be talked about so that education can, continue to progress. So that's it for this video, the first time I ever did CPR. So yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.